It was Halloween night, October 31st, 2002. Downtown Minneapolis was buzzing. Bars were packed. People in costumes spilled onto sidewalks like actors between scenes. But while most saw it as a night for tricks and treats, one young man was walking into a story that no one could make sense of, even 2 decades later. His name was Chris Jenkins, a 21-year-old senior at the University of Minnesota, business major, captain of his lacrosse team, a swimmer, a leader, a son. That night, he was wearing a brown nylon outfit and a red feathered headband dressed up as a Native American. His girlfriend, Ashley, played the role of a sexy police officer. The two of them had plans: enjoy the party at his place, then head downtown for some Halloween fun. Chris was not just another college kid. By every account, he was kind, grounded, and thoughtful. His parents, Jan and Steve Jenkins, would later tell stories of him defending bullied kids, showing up for his community, and never backing down from what was right. He was not the kind to stumble into trouble, but trouble seemed to find him anyway. That night began with laughter. He and Ashley hit a house party in Dinkytown, Minneapolis's student neighborhood, and around 10:30 p.m. they left with friends for the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. Ashley, who worked there, had the night off. She held onto Chris's wallet, phone, and keys. His costume had no pockets. And, like many couples out that night, they figured nothing could go wrong. But shortly after midnight, Chris disappeared. The story of what happened next depends on who you ask. Witnesses remember fragments. Reports conflict. Some say he got into an altercation. Others say he spilled beer on himself. One version claims bouncers thought he was too drunk and threw him out. Another says he walked out on his own. But one detail is not up for debate. Chris was never seen alive again. The temperature dropped to 24 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius that night. Chris, kicked out without his jacket, wallet, or phone, was left alone in the freezing night. Why was he kicked out in the first place? That is where the cracks begin to form. Some witnesses described an incident inside the bar involving 2 men and a woman jealousy, a few harsh words, and then Chris stepped in to de-escalate. He was the peacemaker. But somehow, in the shuffle, his beer spilled on his pants. Later, bouncers claimed they thought he had urinated on himself. That assumption alone might have been enough for them to toss him out. But here's where things get weird. A friend of Ashley's, a Minneapolis police officer named Mike, was working security next door that night. Some speculate he had a personal interest in Ashley. He was seen going in and out of the Lone Tree Bar repeatedly. According to one investigator, Mike may have been involved in the decision to remove Chris from the bar. The optics were not great. Chris was left out in the cold. Ashley went home later with Mike. Ashley did not realize she still had Chris's phone in her purse until she got home. It was too late to call him back. The next morning, she visited Chris's house. His bed had not been slept in. His costume was untouched. His roommates were still asleep. She joked perhaps nervously about Chris seeing someone else. But when he still had not shown up or made contact by that evening, the fear began to settle in. His parents reported him missing. But the police, they told the Jenkins to wait 72 hours. Chris was an adult. Maybe he just needed time. Maybe he took an impromptu trip. But his parents knew better. Chris was not the kind to disappear. There were rumors that Chris had been seen walking across the Hennepin Avenue Bridge, heading in the general direction of his home. His parents tried to confirm that sighting. They contacted the Federal Reserve Bank, which had security cameras pointed at the bridge. Tapes were reviewed. Not once did Chris appear. It was as if he had simply vanished from downtown. His parents were not willing to sit back. They hired a private investigator, Chuck Lowe, to dig into what the police were not. Lowe began documenting everything: timelines, witness statements, GPS coordinates. If someone knew what happened to Chris, he was determined to find them. 1 week later, Lo and Chris's sister, Sarah, conducted a scent trail with a trained bloodhound. The trail began at the bar and led directly to a nearby parking garage. There, in stalls 89 and 90, the dog alerted to something twice. Later, tiny droplets of blood, a red feather, and a red string were found near the same stalls. Chris's signature red feather, the one from his Halloween costume, was that the scene of an abduction? No cameras, no witnesses, no answers. The bar issued a gag order on employees, telling them to say only that Chris walked out and to speak to lawyers before answering any questions. A young man with no ID, in freezing temperatures, was allegedly escorted out without his belongings, and no attempt was made to help him. No jacket, no phone, no wallet, no keys. The Minneapolis police initially chalked it up to an accident or a choice, just another college kid who drank too much and maybe ended up in the river. But that assumption would begin to unravel. Chris's family knew. They felt it. This was not an accident. It was the start of something darker. The mystery of Chris Jenkins did not just lie in his disappearance, it lived in the silence that followed. Silence from the bar, from authorities, from friends who might have seen more than they admitted. And then there were the pieces. Scattered, strange, and stubbornly inconsistent. Let us start with what we do know. Multiple accounts place Chris inside the Lone Tree Bar that Halloween night, happily drinking with friends, talking to Ashley. But somewhere around midnight, something changed. Some reports say he got into a brief altercation between two men. He was not aggressive, he was breaking it up. Somehow, though, beer ended up spilled on his pants. To the bouncers, it looked like Chris had urinated on himself. They thought he was too drunk. They claimed they escorted him out. Others, like bouncer Tony, interviewed years later, said Chris was not kicked out at all. He left on his own, agitated, heading down Hennepin Avenue, in the direction of the bridge. But here's the problem. There is no consensus. Was he physically removed by staff? Did he walk out voluntarily? If he left alone, why was not there an effort to get him home safely, especially considering he had no phone, wallet, or ID? And why was the bar so quick to silence their employees after he vanished? According to private investigator Chuck Lowe, the Lone Tree Bar issued a gag order. Staff were told to say only that Chris walked out, and that they were not to speak to anyone without legal counsel. Why would a bar cover its tracks that tightly, if this was just an ordinary incident? Then there is Mike, the Minneapolis police officer, who gave Ashley a ride home that night. He was friends with Ashley. Some speculate he may have had feelings for her. He also happened to be working security next door to the Lone Tree Bar on Halloween night. This detail is not just background noise. It is central to understanding the potential power dynamics in play. Mike was seen entering and exiting the bar throughout the evening. Was he involved in the decision to remove Chris? Did he speak with bouncers, influence their call? It is impossible to say definitively. But there is something chilling about the fact that Ashley left with Mike and Chris never made it home at all. More unsettling still, Mike was never seriously questioned by police during the initial investigation. Their reason? He is a married man with children. We did not want to break up a family. That is not justice. That is negligence. Weeks after Chris vanished, another man came forward. He told investigators that he had gone to the Lone Tree Bar and ordered a drink. After just a few sips, he began to feel disoriented, confused. As he stepped outside for fresh air, bouncers tried to put him into a car. He fought back, called a friend, managed to escape. He was taken to a hospital where doctors discovered GHB in his system, a powerful sedative, often referred to as a day drug. And suddenly, Chris Jenkins' story did not look like a one-off. It looked like a pattern. Let us go back to that bloodhound search. Lo, Chris's sister Sarah, and a handler conducted a detailed scent trailing exercise, starting near the bar and working their way through nearby lots and sidewalks. Twice, the dog alerted strongly at stalls 89 and 90 in a parking garage across from the Lone Tree Bar. This was not a random hit. From 2 different starting points, the dog led them there. There, they found small droplets of blood, a red string, a red feather. Chris's red feather. From his costume, to this day, no one has confirmed that the blood or string was ever tested for DNA. Even stranger, a bouncer's vehicle was reportedly parked in one of those stalls that night. It is unclear whether it was the same bouncer involved in Chris's removal, but when the bloodhound was taken to that vehicle later, it reportedly reacted again. Still, no charges were filed, no arrests. The evidence, it sat in limbo. The Hennepin Avenue Bridge, the most logical route home for Chris, was covered by surveillance cameras from the Federal Reserve Bank. Chris's parents requested the tapes. Multiple people reviewed hours of footage. Not once did they see Chris crossing. One supervisor even told the FBI that it would have been impossible for someone to sprint across the bridge unnoticed. The cameras were motion activated. They would have caught something. So if he did not cross the bridge, then where did he go? Where was he taken? Months passed. The case grew cold, literally and figuratively. Then, on a cold afternoon in February 2003, a woman walking across the 3rd Avenue Bridge spotted a body floating in the Mississippi River. Hours later, the body shifted, caught on a tree limb, before it could flow over the dam. That night, Steve Jenkins received a call. It was his son. Chris was found face up, his shirt still tucked in. His oversized loafer shoes that slip off with ease were still on his feet. His arms were crossed at the wrist over his chest. And in one hand, he clutched strands of his own hair. Let us stop here. This is not how drowning victims are found. Most are discovered face down, clothing disturbed, and shoes, especially loose ones, missing. The violent motion of drowning, the thrashing, the currents, the time underwater, all of it leads to dishevelment, damage, even missing limbs in extreme cases. But Chris, he looked, placed, composed. The autopsy revealed 0.12% blood alcohol content, not enough to incapacitate him entirely, but certainly enough to impair him. More importantly, it found GHB in his system. Now, here's where things get messy. Some experts claim that GHB can form naturally post-mortem. The body produces it in decomposition. But other studies suggest that its presence, particularly in detectable amounts, points to prior ingestion or injection. There is no consensus. But when you add the fact that another man from the same bar reported being drugged with GHB, that raises serious questions. Coincidence or connection? Chris's body showed no bruising, no signs of a struggle, no cuts, no breaks, no injuries one might expect from a bridge fall or a fight. Not even bruises from lacrosse practice, which he had played just the day before his disappearance. His mother recalled that he typically had at least a few marks from the game. But now nothing. This made no sense. If he had been in the river for 4 months, he should have shown some signs of decay, cold water damage, or injuries from impact. But he did not. The bar's gag order, the blood and feather in the garage, the conflicting accounts from bouncers, the scent trails that led to nowhere, or to a cover-up, and a police department that for years refused to classify Chris's death as a homicide, despite an avalanche of red flags. You would be forgiven for wondering, is this incompetence or is it something more? Because what happened that night was not just a mystery. It was a failure on nearly every level. It was the Mississippi River that finally gave Chris Jenkins back to the world. But what it returned was not just a body. It was a riddle. A chilling message. A frozen testimony in flesh and silence. February 27, 2003, 4 months after Chris disappeared. A woman walking across the 3rd Avenue Bridge noticed something floating in the water below. It was not moving with the current. It was not sinking. It was stuck, caught on a tree limb, swaying gently, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. Hours later, that same woman turned on the news and realized what she had seen. A young man's body, pulled from the icy Mississippi, identified as Chris Jenkins, but this was not closure. It was just the beginning of a darker chapter. When investigators examined Chris's body, they were stunned. He was found face up, his shirt still tucked in, his oversized slip-on loafers still on his feet, his arms crossed over his chest, and in one hand, strands of his own hair. That last part, the hair, defied explanation. It was not loose hair, it was clutched, tight. Chris had held onto it in his final moments, or someone had placed it there. It did not look like a drowning. It looked like a message. The official cause of death? Drowning. That is what the police stuck with, even after private investigator Chuck Lowe questioned how Chris's shoes could have remained on if he would fallen from a bridge. Oversized loafers should have slipped off on impact with the water. The pathologist agreed. It was highly unlikely they would have stayed on. So what did that suggest? That he did not fall. That? Maybe. He did not jump either. Chris's blood alcohol content was recorded at 0.12%, a level that indicates impairment, yes, but not unconsciousness. He could have walked, talked, functioned. He may have seemed tipsy, but not dangerously. So, more concerning, the presence of GHB in his system. Now, this is where the scientific mud begins to thicken. Some toxicologists argue that GHB can occur naturally during decomposition. Others point out that the levels found in Chris's body were significant and eerily similar to the GHB dose found in the bloodstream of the other man from Lone Tree Bar, the one nearly forced into a car. It is a matter of interpretation, and science does not offer certainty here. But what if the presence of GHB is not the smoking gun? What if it is the pattern? 2 men, 1 bar, 1 drug, one nearly escaped, the other did not. Here's what else did not sit right. Chris's body showed no decomposition, consistent with 4 months in cold water. Experts pointed out that although the Mississippi River was cold, it did not freeze until late January. That is more than 2 months after Chris vanished. And yet, his body showed little decay, no insect activity, no signs of water trauma. Forensic experts stated that had Chris been in the water for that long, he would have been in far worse shape. Floating debris, water currents, seasonal thawing, none of it had left a mark. Which begs the question, was he in the water the whole time? Or was his body kept somewhere preserved, protected, and placed into the river later? Dr. Michael Baden, a world-renowned forensic pathologist, was consulted by the Jenkins family. He reviewed the autopsy photos and offered a blunt assessment. This was not an accident. This was not a suicide. This was a homicide. His reasoning: most drowning victims are found face down, with arms extended and clothing in disarray. Chris was face up, composed, unbruised, and oddly intact. His shoes were on. His arms were crossed over his chest, a position uncharacteristic of natural drowning. Dr. Baden believed the body had been staged. To test their theory, Chuck Lowe and his team conducted an experiment using a dummy same weight, similar clothing, dropped into the Mississippi River at various points. Each time, the dummy ended up in the same place Chris's body was found. But that did not prove Chris fell in by accident. If anything, it proved intent. Whoever put his body in the river may have known where it would drift and get stuck, possibly on purpose. And then, there is the Excel power plant, located near where Chris's body was recovered. An employee at the plant told Lowe that when the turbines are active, anything north of the dam gets sucked toward that area. Was that the plan? Drop the body upstream, let the turbines move it, and count on nature to finish the job? Or was Chris simply placed there, his body drifting just enough before it was caught? We may never know. Perhaps the most chilling detail was this: there were no bruises, no scrapes, no broken bones. If Chris had fallen or been pushed from a bridge, there would have been impact damage. If he had been assaulted, there would have been signs of a struggle. If he had drowned while conscious, there would have been bruising or injuries from thrashing. Instead, he was pristine, unscarred, peaceful. Too peaceful. The Jenkins family fought for answers. They begged the Minneapolis police to take the case seriously, to reopen the files, to stop treating their son like another drunk college kid who made a bad decision. And then finally, someone listened. In 2006, a new police chief took over, Tim Dolan. Presented with all the evidence that the Jenkins family and Chuck Lowe had compiled, Dolan did something the department had resisted for years. He reclassified Chris's death as a homicide. It was one of the only cases in Minnesota involving a missing young man found in a river that was ever officially declared a murder. This was not just a label. By acknowledging homicide, the case took on new life, new investigators, new resources, and a new public urgency. It also suggested something disturbing. Chris Jenkins was not alone. Because if his death was not accidental, if this was something planned, deliberate, then it might not have been random either. And if not random, maybe there were others. Across the country, from New York to Wisconsin to Iowa, families were reporting eerily similar stories. Young men, college-aged, popular, athletic, vanished after a night out, found in water weeks or months later. And every time, the police said the same thing. He probably got drunk and fell in it. But not every family accepted that. Not after Chris. By 2006, the Minneapolis Police Department had changed course. What began as a tragic accident was now officially a homicide. The reclassification did not solve the case, but it cracked something wide open. It told the world that Chris Jenkins did not die by chance. He died at someone else's hands. But whose? That is where the trail turns from cold to chaotic. Not long after the case was reopened, a man sitting in prison stepped forward. He said he would witness everything. According to his story, he and an acquaintance had encountered Chris that night, robbed him, found nothing worth stealing, and out of rage threw him off the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. It sounds like a breakthrough, but the problem is, it was not. For starters, Chris had no broken bones, no blunt trauma, no abrasions. A fall from that bridge, which stands high above the Mississippi, would have done serious damage. Second, forensic experts, including private investigator Chuck Lowe, pointed out that the bridge's structure makes it nearly impossible to throw someone over without signs of injury. There are safety railings, vertical support cables, and a metal beam waist high that would require significant effort to overcome. And yet, Chris had no marks, no bruises, no scratches from steel. So if this inmate was telling the truth, why did not the evidence match his story? The most likely explanation: he was not telling the truth at all. It is common for incarcerated individuals to offer false confessions in exchange for lighter sentences or attention. They mix just enough detail to sound convincing, but rarely line up with forensic reality. So this lead, it was a dead end. But it opened the door to something even darker. In the course of reinvestigating Chris's case, detectives uncovered a violent gang operating across Minneapolis known as the Dealers of Death, or DOD. And one man in particular stood out: Jeremy Lynn Orford. Convicted for a separate crime, Orford was already in prison when he was identified as a prime suspect in Chris Jenkins' death. His background, disturbing. In his early 20s, Orford and his brother brutally murdered their roommate Douglas Miller. They stabbed him 20 times with a barbecue fork and a knife. Then, they beat him with a hammer and set the house on fire to cover it up. This was not someone who snapped. This was ritualized, unhinged. Orford was known to recruit vulnerable youth into his orbit: runaways, misfits, anyone who needed a place to sleep or someone to fear. And according to some sources, including a female informant, Orford had bragged about killing Chris Jenkins. It gets stranger. Orford allegedly ran with a crew of criminals, including one known only as Smiley. Yes, that is right. The same name that would soon be linked to the now infamous Smiley Face murders theory. Smiley claimed their gang had killed 30 to 40 people, though not all fitting the same profile. According to interviews with police, he lived in a tent by the river, had a history of violence, and was on antipsychotic medication. He described Orford as a leader figure and said Orford once confessed to murdering a college kid wearing an Indian costume. The detail is eerie. Chris wore a Native American outfit that Halloween, but then Smiley botched the name. He called the victim Andrew, not Chris. Was this just confused memory, a lie, or an attempt to link himself to something high profile? Smiley's credibility was shaky, at best, but that did not stop investigators from digging deeper. Despite these alarming connections, despite the confessions, the clues, the circumstantial overlap, no one was ever charged. Why? Because every trail hit the same wall: lack of evidence. No eyewitnesses. No DNA. No video. No one willing to testify under oath. And in the justice system, suspicion without proof is nothing. Chris's family had to live with that. But private investigator Chuck Lowe refused to walk away. In a now deleted blog post, a long comment appeared, allegedly written by Chuck himself. He detailed the inner workings of the investigation, the secrecy, the red tape, the politics. He named names. He pointed out how Ashley's friend, the Minneapolis police officer who gave her a ride home that night, played a key role in Chris being kicked out of the bar. He explained how that officer's presence, his influence on security staff, and the gag orders from the bar were the first dominoes in a sequence that led to Chris's death. Lowe's words were raw, frustrated, but most of all they felt like the voice of someone who had seen too much. This is where the story broadens into national territory. The Smiley Face murders theory emerged in the mid-2000s, proposed by two retired NYPD detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. They believed that Chris Jenkins was just one victim in a larger network of homicides. Here's their thesis. 45 young, athletic, college-aged men had drowned under suspicious circumstances in 11 different states. Most were found in water after nights of drinking. Graffiti of smiley faces were found near some of the sites. The victims fit a similar profile: clean-cut, athletic, intelligent white males. Gannon and Duarte suggested that these deaths were not random or accidental, but the work of an organized group of killers. The theory was met with intense skepticism. Law enforcement agencies across the country dismissed it, calling the connections circumstantial at best. Some pointed out that smiley face graffiti is everywhere, especially near rivers, bridges, and underpasses. Critics like criminal profiler Pat Brown called the theory ludicrous, pointing out that the deaths did not follow typical patterns of serial killing. And the FBI, they issued a statement saying they found no evidence of a serial killer or killers behind these deaths. So does that mean it is all a hoax? Not necessarily, because Chris's case is different. It is not just a drowning. It is a reclassified homicide with indicators of staging, GHB, gang connections, and inconsistent witness accounts. Even if the smiley face angle is speculative, Chris Jenkins may still have been targeted by someone or something organized. There is one final clue, buried in the chaos of this story. During the search for Chris, hundreds of volunteers blanketed the city with missing posters. They combed through parks, rivers, even Nicollet Island, a small stretch of land with tunnels and caves beneath it. One day, someone found a message scribbled on a missing poster. Loaded in trunk. Paid for by Dollar Green. No one knows who wrote it. Was it a cruel joke? A gang tag? A confession? Police never confirmed its relevance. But Chris's family could not ignore it. Because by then, the pattern was clear. No one else was going to connect the dots for them. By now, one thing is certain. Chris Jenkins did not just die. He was lost in a web of silence, conflicting motives, and institutional failures that may have sealed his fate before the investigation even began. A web of missed questions, hidden agendas, and people who knew more than they ever said. Let us start with the man who continues to haunt this case. Jeremy Lynn Orford. Let us not sugarcoat this. Orford was a dangerous man. He was not suspected of murder because of rumors. He was a convicted killer, already serving time for the brutal slaying of his roommate. The details were horrifying: stabbed over 20 times with a fork and knife, beaten with a hammer, then burned in an attempt to destroy the evidence. But what disturbed investigators even more was what Orford said next. From behind bars, he told multiple people, both inmates and outsiders, that he had been involved in other killings. One of them, a college student dressed in a Native American costume. Sound familiar? This detail was never made public at the time, yet somehow, Orford described it accurately. The problem? He never used the name Chris. He said the victim was Andrew. That inconsistency caused police to hesitate. Was it a mix-up? Or an attempt to mask a confession? Even more alarming was that a female informant later came forward, saying Orford had bragged about killing Chris Jenkins. Still, no charges were filed. Beyond his criminal record, Orford seemed to relish psychological dominance. He had recruited runaways, manipulated them, and according to prosecutors, branded some with hot razors to signify gang initiation. One survivor said he promised to take them to Minnesota and make them part of the gang. That gang, the Dealers of Death, allegedly had hundreds of members. Many were drifters, outcasts, or victims of abuse. And yet, when authorities confronted Orford about Chris Jenkins, his reply was chillingly calculated. I do not want to speak on something I was not convicted of. Not I was not there. Not I do not know him. Just not convicted. Was that a slip? Or was it a dare? While Orford remains the official prime suspect, many followers of the case continue to point fingers at someone much closer to the scene, and to Ashley. Let us go back to Mike, the Minneapolis police officer, and Ashley's friend, who gave her a ride home that night. Mike was on duty. He was working security next door to the Lone Tree Bar. He had access, influence, and reportedly a personal interest in Ashley. He also had something else: protection. When Chris vanished, some people wondered why Mike was not questioned more thoroughly. After all, he was the last known person to be with Ashley. He moved in and out of the bar freely, and his connections with the bouncers may have impacted how Chris was treated. But the official reasoning for not interviewing him? He is a married man with children. We did not want to break up a family. Let that sink in. A young man disappears under mysterious circumstances. His body turns up months later with no explanation. And the authorities refuse to interrogate a potentially key figure because he is married. If that is not corruption, it is at least gross negligence. Remember the Bloodhound Trail? The dog traced Chris's scent not just once but twice to the same location, parking stalls 89 and 90 in a garage near the Lone Tree Bar. There, searchers found a red feather from Chris's costume, a red string, and small droplets of blood. They also identified that a bouncer had parked in that stall the night Chris vanished. The same bouncer who may have helped remove Chris from the bar. Yet again, no further action. Why? Were the police protecting their own? Or did they just not want to chase a lead that would force them to admit they would failed horribly? As time passed, more inconsistencies surfaced. Witnesses who later contradicted their original statements. Employees who refused to talk without lawyers. Potential suspects who were shielded by department policy. And then there were the odd details no one ever explained. Why did the bar issue a gag order immediately after Chris vanished? Why was not video surveillance from the night more thoroughly analyzed? Why did not they test the blood and feather found in the parking garage? The Jenkins family kept asking, but the system kept closing doors. When the police finally reclassified the case as a homicide, it was thanks to public pressure, not internal will. The family had been running their own investigation for years, talking to experts, hiring professionals, even recreating crime scenes. And when Chief Tim Dolan took office, he was forced to look at the evidence they had uncovered. To his credit, he did. He reopened the case. But even then, no one was arrested, because too much time had passed. Too many witnesses had moved, changed stories, or gone silent. And the people who might have been involved, they were either in jail for other crimes or still walking free. At its heart, the Chris Jenkins case is a story about silence. Institutional silence, strategic silence, guilty silence. But it is also a story about persistence. Because Chris's parents, Jan and Steve Jenkins, never stopped fighting. They refused to let their son become a footnote. John even wrote a book about their journey. They believed then, and they still believe now, Chris was murdered. And not by accident, not by some cosmic mishap, but by human hands and human choices. What if Ashley had held on to Chris longer at the bar? What if the bouncer had let him back in? What if the police had started searching the next morning? What if Mike had been properly investigated? What if someone, anyone, had chosen to speak up? We can't answer those questions. But we can remember that behind every unsolved mystery is a family still waiting. Waiting not just for justice but for the truth. Chris Jenkins vanished into the Halloween night in 2002. He reappeared 4 months later, quiet, composed, and dead. For all the theories, leads, and speculation, one question still hangs over everything, like fog over the Mississippi. Who killed Chris Jenkins? There are no easy answers. But the evidence, scattered and fragile, does not suggest a fall. It does not suggest drunkenness or misadventure. It suggests intent. Let us go back to the facts. Chris was kicked out or left the bar with no coat, phone, wallet, or keys. His body showed no signs of trauma, despite the theory that he was thrown off a bridge. His clothing was undisturbed, shoes on, shirt tucked in, arms crossed. He was holding his own hair, possibly torn out in pain or fear. His body had GHB in it. So did another man's, from the same bar. A bloodhound tracked his scent to a parking garage twice. A bouncer's car was parked there. His red feather and blood droplets were found nearby. Does that sound like an accident? Or does it sound like someone wanted to make it look like one? Some investigators, including Chuck Lowe and Chris's family, believe the truth is this. Chris was abducted, possibly from the garage, possibly by people associated with the bar, possibly by a group like the Dealers of Death. He was drugged, held somewhere, maybe tortured, maybe kept alive for days or weeks. And when it was over, his body was placed in the river, carefully, deliberately. The goal: remove evidence, stage a natural death, wash everything away. Only it did not work, because the Mississippi gave him back. The water did not destroy the evidence. It preserved it. The lack of decomposition. the absence of trauma. The shoes still on his feet, the arms gently crossed. It was not how a body floats. It was how a body is positioned. Whoever placed Chris in the river did not expect the body to last. They did not think the water would freeze so late. They did not count on the current catching on a tree limb. Nature refused to finish the cover-up. Despite everything, every theory, every press release, every reclassification, the case remains unsolved. No arrests, no indictments, no trials. Jeremy Lynn Orford, the man many suspect, still sits in prison for a different crime. His claims about Chris, legally meaningless. Mike, the police officer who gave Ashley a ride home that night, was never charged or formally investigated. His connection to the case is a footnote. The bouncers who worked that night, most have disappeared from the record. And so, the silence continues. Chris's family are not alone. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of families across America who have lost sons under similar circumstances. Young men, college-aged, athletic, smart, popular, gone after a night out, found later in rivers, lakes, canals. Many of their deaths have been ruled accidental. Most of them were drinking. Almost none of them had closure. Some call it coincidence. Others, the Smiley Face Killer theory. But regardless of what you believe, this pattern deserves attention. Because even if it is not one killer, it might be something worse. A system that refuses to connect the dots. In the years following Chris's death, his mother Jan Jenkins wrote a book titled Footprints of Courage. It is not just about Chris. It is about the fight, the exhausting, soul-breaking effort to get law enforcement to take her son's life seriously. She describes the phone calls, the press conferences, the forensic reports, the nights she could not sleep because some piece of evidence would not stop screaming. She fought for a second autopsy. She fought for media coverage. She fought for reclassification. And she fought because no one else would. Why do authorities resist revisiting old cases? Liability. Acknowledging mistakes opens the door to lawsuits. Reputation. No one wants to admit they missed something fatal. Workload. Cold cases are resource intensive. Politics. When police officers are suspects, everything gets more complicated. But what about when those decisions cost lives? How many more Chris Jenkinses will we lose before we admit something is not working? We do not know how Chris died, but we know he died scared. He tore hair from his own head. He was found in water, but showed no signs of drowning panic. He was possibly kept alive, possibly unconscious. We do not know if he cried out, if he was alone, if he knew the end was near. But we do know he did not deserve it, and that whoever did this walked away. If you have watched this far, you have felt it, that weight, that ache, that injustice. Maybe you see someone you love in Chris. Maybe you have been near a situation that did not feel right. Maybe you have walked out of a bar and felt a cold wind on the back of your neck. Remember Chris Jenkins. He was more than a case. He was a son, a friend, a teammate, a light. And someone made the choice to end that. We live in a world that teaches us to look away, to move on, to chalk things up to bad luck, to call it just another accident. But stories like Chris Jenkins's are warnings. They tell us, ask harder questions. Demand better answers. Don't let silence win. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. Chris's case is not just a mystery. It is a reminder that we can't afford to stop caring. Share this story. Learn about other unsolved cases, like Chris's. Support organizations working on cold cases. Talk to your friends about bar safety and staying together. If you have information, no matter how small, come forward. Even one truth can unearth 100 lies. And maybe one day, someone will speak, and Chris Jenkins' story, Maishori, will finally end with justice.